Okay, so we're starting day 2 of our project, and my recommendation to you has been, in addition to having your paper out, right? This is so that when you keep working from home, I'm going to be able to give you this advice on how to build textures, right? We're creating kind of a faux texture. So sometimes what I'll do is have a blank sheet of paper out and ready to work on alongside, okay? So for example, I'll start with a base layer that's a good medium gray. And I'm going to take my charcoal, I'm going to kind of break it up. And if I'm working with maybe a compressed and vine, okay, because it's harder to erase the compressed, but you need to build that depth. I'm going to start by kind of just making little sort of generic marks. And this is if I wanted to just kind of build and layer a texture. And everything's still in my middle grays, right? And then I'm going to take my compressed. I'm also going to just kind of, you see I'm like skittering it in. I'm twisting, I'm moving my hand. We're just talking about making abstract marks. Then what I can do is take my kneaded eraser, get it worked really well into some kind of an abstract, just knot. And then I'm going to use that to kind of bounce around the surface. And what I'm doing is I'm creating a pattern and I'm creating a texture. All right, now this is a generic one. This is like, I don't know, if something was granite. If something was granite, or if something was like floor textured, or just to build layers. But there's a lot of other options for you to do. If something is wooden, right? Your gut instinct is just going to be to take your tool and just do that and be like, look, I drew wood. But the reality is that things are a lot more kind of abstract than that. So you can use your tool to create dynamic lines and shapes that mimic wood grain. But remember that you need to focus on building that value. And in addition to that, then you can go back in, take your kneaded eraser really tiny and tight, and you can erase out fine lines, right? But all the lines and the fine lines and stuff happen towards the end of it. Okay, you want to really build the value as you're building the texture, or build the value first and then add the details on top, because as you're building those details, you need to think of things as working in layers. So I get everything kind of established as far as where my wood grain is. And then I can take my compressed and do some fine line details, like within the value. Right? And you see how that's going to build it even more? If we have something that is speckled, or yeah, let's start with something speckled. I'm going to still start with a mid-tone gray. I'm going to take in my vine charcoal. I'm going to do some dots. I'm going to take my compressed. I'm going to do some dots. And where dots are more clustered together, the value overall is going to be darker, as opposed to areas where the dots are, kind of further apart. And then I'm still going to take my kneaded eraser gonna do a little bit of pointillism in there to try to push my value further. Okay, so you can see I'm just trying to tell you today what you're going to want to do is really look at the texture of your object and think to yourself, how can I make it not blendy, blendy, blendy texture? How can I make it not charcoal textured, right? Some of us have striations and we've got shells. We can start by kind of finding where our value is, right? Going back in, pushing it further. You can see I'm really just experimenting with how I'm moving my hand a lot of the time. Like, it's a matter of just having a sheet that you can play on. You know, I've got a lot of time under my belt of experimenting with charcoal, so I'm kind of a little bit more aware of what the tool can do, whereas if you're just kind of getting to know this material, you're still learning everything that this tool has to offer. And it's so much. So I can build some of my striations. And then again, our issue is we really want to go in and do those teeny, teeny, teeny fine lines, but that stuff doesn't come until like the very last details that you do. And you can even do this in with like a charcoal pencil. Right, where you start bringing in these little skittery marks. And you're layering and you're building and you're just exploring mark making to its fullest extent. Okay? And the best way to do that is to have a sheet next to you so that you can build value and lay it in, but also build texture at the same time. Okay? Because if you build value first and then you build texture on top, you're going to end up erasing a lot of your value and relying entirely on the marks you make, right? Which will mean you're going to kind of look like you've got the one flat value and then your texture on top. And then your value range drops down to 2. But if you build them at the same time, and you think of it in terms of like, okay, well, it is darker down here, so my dots are closer together, and then they're more spread out where it's lighter. They work as a team, and it builds your piece faster, in addition to building it with more depth and more mark-making skills. So those of us who are working from home today, you're going to want to make sure that you have a blank sheet next to you where you can do this kind of experimentation until you find the language that you want to show your object. All right? Okay.